InPitLane is proudly brought to you by the Australian Sports Sedan Association of Victoria. Round 5 of the Grunt Performance Victorian Sports Sedan Championship. And with thanks to Slipstream Race Graphics. Well, hello everybody, welcome to a special edition of InPitLane. We're coming to you once again from Motorclassica. It's the 2018 edition. And celebrating this year at the Motorclassica, 90 years of the Australian Grand Prix, and somebody who, well, he hasn't been there certainly for any 90 years, but he would go back with many memories, not just as a competitor, but also in the days when his father raced in the Australian Grand Prix back in the day. Here's, of course, our 1980 World Formula One champion, Alan Jones. Alan, welcome to Motorclassica.
Thank you very much. It's great to be here.
Now, tell us about the Australian Grand Prix, 90 years. What's your earliest memory of the Australian Grand Prix?
Well, obviously not the first one, but, you know, a lot of people don't realise we were the third country in the world to host a Grand Prix. First one was the French Grand Prix, second one was in Italy, and the third one was at Phillip Island here in Victoria. That's no mean feat, I don't think, but ever since I was knee-high to a grasshopper, I was going motor racing, and a lot of those were the Australian Grand Prix that Dad was competing in. And I was fortunate enough to be at Longford when he won the Australian Grand Prix in the 250F Maserati. And I remember going on the victory lap with him, sitting on the back of the fuel tank, which
I think that's the famous photos of that. Yes,
yeah, it was great. And then, of course, later on in life, I was lucky enough to compete in the Australian Grand Prix and win that. And we're still the only father and son to have ever won the Australian Grand Prix.
So when the days when your father was running, I mean, obviously it wasn't a round of the World Championship back in those days, but even so, back in the day, it attracted pretty much the world's best drivers. Who were some of the drivers you remember from those days?
Well, yeah, I mean, obviously Bruce McLaren, Jack Brabham, Sterling Moss, Jean Barras, I believe, came out. You know, they were top drivers in the day, and in fact, he also actually won the New Zealand Grand Prix, and I think he was the first Australian ever to win a Grand Prix outside of Australia. And he beats the factory Ferrari and BRMs, and he was actually offered a test drive in Ferrari because of that, which he declined because he was starting a new business. And I think he always regretted that.
So when you started to drive, the first time we saw you in the Australian Grand Prix was in the days of Formula 5000. What were your memories of those cars?
I love the Formula 5000s. I actually raced Can-Am in America and Canada as well, which were basically Formula 5000s with a sports car body on them, a lot more downforce. But they were great, you know, big thumping V8s. I mean, the ground used to rattle when you started them up. They sounded good, looked good. They were really good fun cars to drive.
It's funny, since those days, if you have a look at those days, because the stands were packed, there were people. Then we moved over to the Formula Pacific, Formula Atlantic cars, which you also drove, but you also drove your Formula One car at Calder Park, and not on the Calder Park that some people would know today, but on the original short circuit. What was it like driving a Formula One car on that very tiny little circuit?
Well, it was a bit different because it was the end of 1980 and I'd just won the World Championship, so you know, you're travelling to some of the best circuits in the world, and not belittling Calder, but in the middle of nowhere without any trees, 40-degree heat. It was a bit of a goat track, but yeah, I think they had 40-odd thousand people there, and they had Jacques Lafitte and Peroni and a few good Formula One drivers there. Giacomelli and the works Alfa Romeo, so it was a good event.
It was funny, several years ago we were out there with the Toyota Formula One team with Timo Glock, and I told him that used to be the site for the Australian Grand Prix. He would not believe me.
I know.
He put it into the same realm as drop bears. I mean, it wasn't really going to happen. The thing about those days, of course, though, with and we just had Bob Jane just recently passed away, is that I suppose that a lot of the things he did out there by getting you guys and people like Nelson Piquet, Alain Prost, Roberto Moreno, all those sort of people in there, was really the stepping stone into us getting around to the World Championship.
Well, it didn't do any harm, that's for sure. I think it increased the awareness of people of Formula One drivers, Grand Prix racing, and how good open-wheeler racing can be. And look, I'm sure it was the catalyst towards Adelaide eventually hosting a round of the World Championship.
You quit sort of after your fairly soon after your World Championship, but you did come back so you could race in the Australian Grand Prix in the Lola. What are your memories of that now? I mean, it wasn't the most successful thing, but do you have any regrets on that, or were you delighted that you did it?
No, not really. I mean, at the end of the day, people say I've had more comebacks than Dame Nellie Melba, but one of the contributing factors for me coming out of retirement, apart from the money, was the fact that it was going to be around in Australia, and that was reasonably important. So I threw myself in the gym and threw myself out of the pub, and got myself reasonably fit and signed up and drove the car called a Beatrice in Adelaide. I think 85 was the very first one, and I was very fortunate in as far as Bernie Eccleston allowed me to go out and do a lap before he released everybody else out, which was, the hairs on the back of my neck was standing out. It was absolutely fantastic. And
yes, I was there for that one. I remember it well.
Well, I was lucky I did that lap.
Yes.
But it was quite funny because Ken Tyrrell complained to Bernie that by allowing me to do that was giving me an unfair advantage. He obviously had no idea the car I was driving. I actually could have started the night before and he still would have been safe. But great memories.
Also, when you retired from Formula One, you also did a bit of local racing here. You raced in what are now supercars. You raced the Porsche 935. Tell us some of your memories about running those cars.
Well, I came back to Australia because, I mean, the fact that I retired from motor racing wasn't because I didn't like motor racing, it was I didn't like living overseas. I wanted to live in Australia. And Christian was born, and I wanted to sort of half increase my chances of being around for his 21st. And I bought a farm up at Yea, which is 80 kilometres northeast of Melbourne. Thought I was going to be a farmer, but the first Melbourne winter soon changed my mind on that one. But but I wanted to continue in the motorsport, and people say, you should have stopped, you won your very last Grand Prix, but that's all statistics, and you can't eat statistics, and you've got to enjoy yourself. So I raced the Porsche, which I thoroughly enjoyed, loved that, driving for Alan Hamilton, and I raced a number of V8 supercars. I got second at Bathurst. I won the 12-hour in a little Mazda with Alan Horsley as team manager. I was still racing cars. I was still going through the motions of waiting for the flag to drop and meeting people and travelling around and racing cars, and that's what I love doing.
You're watching a special edition of InPitLane from Motorclassica 2018. When we come back, more of our chat with 1980 World Formula One champion Alan Jones. Don't go away, we'll be right back. Welcome back to InPitLane from Motorclassica 2018. And now let's head back to our chat with 1980 Formula One World Champion Alan Jones. Your involvement nowadays is more as a commentator and an observer of the scene in Formula One. What's your take? We've seen sort of the era of Eccleston has now ended. We've seen Liberty Media take over. How do you think the sport is progressing at the moment in Formula One? Where is it going, and are you concerned in its direction?
Look, it's a very good question. Bernie was absolutely fantastic for the sport. You need a dictator. You need a passive dictator, almost like Australia does. But you need somebody that can make a decision. When he retired and the Americans took over, somebody said to me, well, who's going to ring up now the presidents of these countries and say we need the grandstand here, we need that doing? He had that ability to do that. And if Bernie made a decision, it was done. And he did more good for Formula One or motorsport than anybody else I know. Undermined by a lot of people that didn't know him. Great bloke, fantastic sense of humour, real enthusiast, loved his sport. Goes without saying, an unbelievable businessman.
Yeah.
But I think since the Americans have taken over, quite frankly, they've tried to Americanise it a little bit. I think that what we've got to do is get rid of some of these aerodynamic dependencies, I call them. And you get the front wings now. When a driver pulls in and says, I couldn't pass him for 30 laps, he was taking my air away from me. Well, they're not pilots, they're racing drivers. And what they've got to do is, whatever they do to the regulations, is make sure that they encourage overtaking, racing. People go to race circuits to see racing, not follow the leader. And unfortunately, I think there's too much of that going on. And also, I think there's too much of, they're scared to go in underneath or have a bit of a passing move in case they touch, and then they get a 4,000 grid penalty, position, which is totally ridiculous because, they issue them with a 30 grid. There's only 20 cars on the grid, so I don't know how they... I mean, I was a steward and, it's a little bit frustrating. There's a book about that big, that if he commits this particular incident or this particular incident happened, chapter 5, paragraph 3, there's the standard sort of penalty that you give him. At the end of the day, if you have a favourite driver, let's just take Daniel Ricciardo, for instance, and you have booked your travel to go to Monaco to see your driver in the Monaco Grand Prix. And at the race meeting before that, there's some sort of an infringement through no fault of his own, and he has to start at the back of the grid. There is no way Daniel Ricciardo or anybody is going to win the Monaco Grand Prix from the back of the grid. Extremely difficult. You've already booked your passage, you're already going to Monaco, you're going to see your favourite driver, and before you even go there, he hasn't got a chance of winning.
Yeah.
I mean, it's just wrong. Right. At the end of the day, punish the teams financially, punish them points-wise in the Manufacturers' Championship, but don't punish a driver for a mechanical problem which he had nothing to do with. Those little things irk me. As you can tell.
And I think a lot of enthusiasts are in that are in the same boat. I mean, it does become very frustrating when you are put in that situation. Just quickly before we let you go, of course you won your World Championship behind the wheel of a Williams. We know that Sir Frank Williams has an enormous amount of respect for you and the job that you did for him. There's a team that is struggling at the moment. What do you think is their future and the future for teams like Williams in this modern environment?
Look, I don't know. It's strange because, like, if you would have said to me 2 or 3 years ago, Williams is a great team. There's no their facilities and their resources and everything are fantastic. Their dedication to motor racing is second to none. They've got one of the best power units in Grand Prix racing. There's no question about that. When Paddy Lowe went there a couple of years ago from Mercedes-Benz, he was the guy that designed the Williams that Nigel Mansell won the World Championship in, the one which is all self-leveling, self-everything. He won like 13 out of 16 races or something. When he went there, I thought, well, Paddy Lowe's going there, we should see a bit of a change. Unfortunately, we haven't really seen that much of a change. Admittedly, I think they need at least one good experienced, quick driver. At the moment, they've got 2 young blokes that aren't very experienced and aren't very quick. So I don't think that's helping particularly. But, I would love to think that they're going to come back. I mean, one thing is for sure in Formula One, nothing ever lasts.
That's it. Well, you made a major contribution to bringing Grand Prix racing to Australia as well. I remember sitting at home and watching late at night with Darrell Eastlake and all that, sort of commentating on your days of Formula One. Good luck with your future endeavours. I hope you enjoy Motorclassica. You had a chance to look around?
I have. I've had a very quick look around. I'm absolutely, fantastic. I mean, the array of cars is just second to none, and I'm really enjoying this off. I don't know how I'll be by Sunday night, but at the moment I'm really having a good time.
Well, we've got you in the prime time. We've got you in pole position, and we're grateful. We're grateful for that for both of our cases.
You very much.
Alan Jones, thanks for joining us in Pit Lane. Motorclassica has been one of the great success stories of the Melbourne motoring scene. One of the reasons for this success is the constant evolution of the concept. New features added every year have transformed the event from a classic car show into a 4-day festival celebrating the best of automotive design and lifestyle. This year, one of the new features was the Restoration Theatre, which attracted large crowds right across the weekend.
The live restoration is basically a demonstration of everything that goes on in a smaller sense of what happens in a restoration. Right at the end, we've got the repair section where we've got fabrication and rust repairs on the Monaro, and Christian's down there making patches and talking to people about how that process works. And then we sort of step our way through all of the tooling and the products that we use to make that happen. So a lot of people are quite impressed when they see a car down that far. They wonder how we're going to get it back together and back into one piece again, but rest assured that's what this stage is. We'll get to that in a minute. Then we go through to the next section, which is the motor trimming, which is probably a process that happens while everything else we're doing is taking place. The motor trimmers there are doing a great job on producing some custom pieces and also some traditional pieces that would go in a restored car, which is really interesting as well. The next phase along with the live restoration theatre is actually the paint side of it, and that's kind of the bit where I like it the most. I'm a painter. I do a lot of the other stuff too, but that's my real passion. So with the paintwork, we've got a Lowbake have been kind enough to bring along their spray booth out there today, out in the car park area where we've been painting panels off a Mercedes. There'll be panels painted off this Falcon also later on today, which will be really good, and throughout the course of the rest of the weekend. And the corporate partners that they've had come on board have been super helpful as well there as well. They're all listed up on the boards and whatnot, and there's so many of them to list. We're just so grateful that they could come along and be a part of this weekend. Fantastic event at Motorclassica.
At an event like Motorclassica, you've got, of course, all of the hardcore enthusiasts who are out there. But what I've noticed today is that you've had a lot of school groups come in. Are kids still interested in, young people, are they still interested in a career in cars? Do they still have that passion for cars that, people of my generation grew up with? Because you get the impression nowadays that, it's not something that they're all that interested in anymore.
Well, yeah, that is the impression, and I'm glad you used that word, because what in our experience, we've got young Brandon, who's fantastic young guy, really passionate, really driven, but Brandon's not on his own there. What we've seen is when young people are exposed to a particular type of industry, largely it sparks their interest in something that they're probably just a little shy and not very confident to go and ask about. So in this particular environment where they're able to see it firsthand and come and approach us about different things and questions that they might have, even just today we've seen so many people who've gone, well, they might just think about pursuing that rather than just having it as an idea. So I think it's really important for us to be able to help the next generation come through, get a clearer idea of what it is that they might want to engage in, and give them that opportunity through the TAFEs and the different organisations that have been so good to bring them along today.
Well, we're here at Motorclassica once again with Paul Mathers, the man behind the ever-growing phenomena that is Motorclassica. And Paul, once again, we're here, it's early on Friday morning and already there's a big crowd here, lots of amazing cars again. Tell us about the process. I mean, does it become a little easier every year as the word spreads around, or is it as difficult as ever to get this incredible collection together?
That's a really good question actually, Brett. Look, it doesn't get easier, but it's not because we have a lack of entries. I think this year we had about 220 entries for 140 places. So it's not like we were starved of entries. But we do get a lot of cars that are similar, or cars that we've seen here before. And the biggest challenge is getting the mix right, getting the right mix of celebration class cars and the mix within those classes right. And then the other cars that are invited in the broader Concours d'Elegance. And it's very important for us to get stuff that is not normally seen at a club event, say. And even if it's not an expensive car, that there's something special about it. I'll give you a perfect example. There's a couple of cars here this year that you might not think, if you look at them on paper, are necessarily worthy to be at a show like Motorclassica or indeed a Concours d'Elegance. There's a Saab Monte Carlo, for instance, and we've got a Toyota Crown from 1967. Now, both these cars are, they're consumer cars, I suppose. They're high production numbers. They're not particularly expensive cars, but there's something special about each one of them. The Toyota is a preservation car that has never been touched in terms of restoration.
It looks at it. You can certainly tell that, can't you?
Well, this car looks like it's been driven out of the showroom. It's an incredible piece of machinery, and the little Saab, it's just a fabulous little car. And I think that what Motorclassica provides is it's about the big expensive collectible cars, but there's also something else for everybody. And getting that mix right is the hard part, and it's a challenge every year. But I think we've done okay this year.
One of the things that you're celebrating this year is 90 years of the Australian Grand Prix. Why the decision to do that this year?
Well, Brett, sports cars are always very popular here at the show, and race cars are also, but they're not really a Concours d'Elegance type of car. But I come back to that point where we like to have something for everyone, and the Grand Prix Corporation was very keen to celebrate this anniversary. They didn't really do it at their event this year, but they thought that this might be a great opportunity to do so. I certainly am very attracted to those 60s Tasman series type cars. I think that they're fantastic, and we put the call out. And what I love about racing cars is that many of them have a story that people can relate to because they've heard about the drivers on the news or in sports broadcasts, or they watched them when they were kids growing up. There's cars that were raced by no less than 7 world champions in that 24-car display. So a third of them have been raced by world champions. And what that does, and then there's Australian champions as well. So what that does is it gives something for people to hold on to. It gives them a story. And whilst all the cars here have got great stories, they've got, championship success, some of these. And I think that that's something that we have to celebrate. And that we're celebrating also not just the cars of other nations, but stuff in our own motoring history that's important. The Australian Grand Prix, I think, you might know better than me, I think was the 3rd Grand Prix in the world. Yes. So it's one of the oldest Grands Prix in the world. And you know what? It's important to celebrate that story. We should be really proud of that heritage.
And most Australians, of course, wouldn't know that. A lot of them think that it started back in Adelaide, back in the 1980s.
Well, that's exactly right. And of course, that was the beginning of the World Championship Formula One series. But it goes back to 1928 at Phillip Island on a road track, pretty rough. An Austin 7 won it. That car is here. And it's a fantastic history.
I know that you're already planning for next year. What can we expect for 2019?
You've been eavesdropping. Okay, well, I'll give you the exclusive. Next year we're celebrating 100 years of Bentley, 100 years of Alvis, and 100 years of Citroën. 70 years, I think it is, of Arbeth. We're doing, I think it might be 70 years of Mini. And then there's Japanese sports cars, which will be the first time we've ever featured Japanese cars here at Motorclassica. And as you would know, the Japanese sports car movement is growing.
It's a whole subculture.
Oh, yeah. Well, it used to be a very boy racer kind of thing, and it was about highly modified cars. But now those cars in their original formats are becoming very desirable, and they're starting to appreciate in value. I mean, at the top end of the chain, you've got the Toyota 2000 GT, which is an over $1 million car. But you look at the rise of something like the Mazda Cosmo, the RX-7s, the early years, the early Z cars, all of those cars, because they're the cars that I grew up with, my generation, they're becoming really collectible and covetable. And the more people want them, the more the prices rise.
I knocked back a Honda S600 for $500 back in about 1972, and I'm still kicking myself.
You could probably be forgiven for doing that in 1972, but you wouldn't want to knock it back now.
No, that's for sure. Paul, it's just an incredible spectacle once again. It's always, talking to all the people, just spoken to Alan Jones, he was saying how incredibly impressed he was having a look around the place. Good luck for as I said, we were here for the first one. It just blew our minds then. It's just got basically better every year since then. So congratulations once again. It's a spectacular show. And for people watching at home, if you've missed this year's one, put it down in the diary for next year. Make sure you're here for Motorclassica 2019. Now, Paul Mathis, thanks again for joining us in Pit Lane.
Thank you, Brett.
Thanks for watching this special edition of In Pit Lane. Hope that you've enjoyed your visit to Motorclassica 2018. Remember to subscribe to the InPitLane YouTube channel and click on the notification bell to stay informed about new content right across the Australian summer. You can also like us on Facebook, and if you'd like to contact us direct about anything on the show, email us at theshow@inpitlane.com. So until we see you again from all the InPitLane team, it's thanks for watching and bye for now.